London in the last hard weeks of that winter was a place of unbearable plenty, and none of the plenty was hers. A great city in a lean season is a cruel thing to the hungry, for it hides nothing. Behind every fogged pane, the ovens were lit before dawn, and the warm smell of them rolled out into the streets and found the cold and the turned away, and gave them only the knowledge of what they would not taste. On the good streets, the confectioners' windows stood stacked with glazed cakes and candied peel and little burnished loaves arranged like a jeweler's tray, and beneath them, the doors swung open and shut the whole day long on gusts of heat and the bright ring of coin, and closed again, always, on the ones outside. Those doors had grown clever, the way such doors do. They could weigh a collar in a single look, the quality of a glove, the mud dried on a hem, the way a chin was carried, and decide on the instant whether the warmth that escaped when they opened was worth the spending on the person who stood there wanting it. And every one of them, that fortnight, had weighed the young woman walking the confectioner's streets and found her not worth the draft. It was her name that did the weighing for them. She had come to give it only when she was forced to, and always last of all, because a name like hers shut a door the very moment it was spoken aloud. Linnet Caro was 24 years old. Once in another life she had been the only daughter of the most sought confectioner in London. Now she was a thing no respectable door cared to let past its step. She stood at the trade entrance of the last shop on her list, a bright and thriving place on a fashionable street, and waited while the mistress of it read her letter of character through a second time. She held her back very straight. She had taught herself that much. You kept your spine straight, and you kept the cold out of your face, and you did not, whatever came, beg. Because when all the rest of a life has been stripped away, the one thing still belonging to a woman is the way she carries the loss, and Linnet meant to carry hers well. The letter was a fine one, and for the length of it the mistress had been almost kind, for the hand was elegant and the words were generous. Then her eye reached the name signed at the foot. "Caro," she said, and looked up, and Linnet watched the name go to work in the woman's face. It was a small thing to see, and she had seen it many times. The little failing of warmth, the polite half-step backward, the recoil people make from a thing they are half afraid is catching. The mistress squared the letter along its folds and returned it at arm's length, the way one hands back something unclean. "The place is filled," she said. "You would do better where the name means nothing. Try the northern towns. Good day to you." The door closed. And Linnet Caro stood in the thin gray light of the afternoon and knew with a plain and final certainty that the woman had told her the truth. Every door in London had shut against her, one after another across a bitter fortnight, and the reason had been the same at each of them, and the reason would never ease, because the thing that had broken her father was not a thing that eased with time. It had been printed, it had been sworn to, and no goodness in the daughter could ever unwrite one line of it. Her father had been Elias Caro, a confectioner of rare gift and rarer patience, a man who had risen out of nothing by doing every small thing better than anyone near him, and never cheapening his work for profit. For 20 years he had made the sugar work and the fine baking for half the great houses of the town, and in all that time nothing had left his kitchen that he had not first tasted with his own mouth. Care was the whole of his religion. And care in the end was the very thing they turned into the knife. There had been a great banquet one summer in one of the first houses in England, and the sweet course that night came from Caro's kitchen, as such courses often did. Before the evening was out, a number of the guests were taken ill, and one of them, a young woman of 19, the sister of the Duke of Haldane, was taken worst of all and did not live to see the morning. What had done it was found in the sweet course, in the sugared almonds, a bitterness cooked down into the sugar that had no business being there, and every eye in the matter turned at once upon the kitchen the dish had come from. Alias Caro told him he had tasted that course before it left his hands, as he tasted all his work, and that there had been no wrong in it when it went. Some other hand, he said, must have reached it afterward. He said it plainly, to men who had settled the question before he opened his mouth, and it changed nothing. There were witnesses enough to swear the almonds had gone out of his kitchen, already spoiled, and none to swear the other way who carried any weight. A great man's sister lay dead. A reckoning was owed to someone, and a tradesman was near to hand, and low enough to bear the whole of it. He was ruined inside a month, and in his grave inside the year, worn through by an illness no physician would name, though everyone who knew him knew its name was shame. Linnet had been a girl of 14. She had sat in that room and heard her father say, in a voice she had never once heard him use, that he had not done it, that in 40 years he had never sent out so much as a wafer he had not tasted, that another's hand had done this, and left his name to answer for it. She believed him then, she believed him still. It weighed nothing anywhere. It mattered. For the certainty of a grieving daughter is not evidence. It is not even a thing the world finds interesting. She had thought at first that a wrong so large could not stand, that the truth would work its way up into the light. She had learned better since. A truth with no person of consequence to speak for it might as well not be true at all. And no person of consequence would come within a mile of the Caro name. Whatever hand had done, the deed had done it cleanly, and had let a careful and honest man carry the whole weight of it into the earth, and had gone home to a warm house and shut the door. So in one season, the name went from the finest in London to a byword for poison, and the daughter went down with it. The custom melted away. The lease was gone, what could be sold was sold. By that last winter, Linnet Caro owned a good letter of character, a straight back, a name that closed every door in the city, and very little else in all the world. It was in a narrow court off the confectioner's street that the carriage came upon her. She heard it before she saw it, the deep sound of good wheels over frozen stone, and she drew aside without turning, to look, the way a person on foot soon learns to do. It did not go past. It slowed. It halted. A servant in plain dark livery stepped down and came to her and asked, with great correctness and not a trace of curiosity, whether he had the honor of addressing Miss Caro. She told him that he had. She could not imagine why he should want to. He held out a letter, a single sheet, folded once and closed with a plain seal, her name written on the face of it in a spare and upright hand. She broke it open there in the cold, her fingers turned clumsy, braced, for she knew not what. Some final cruelty, some old debt come round at last. It was 3 lines. You are offered the tenancy of the bakehouse at Lark Hollow. The oven is yours, and whatever you have it in you to make of it. A carriage waits below to carry you there this hour. No name was set beneath it. In place of one, at the very foot of the page, stood a single letter drawn larger than the rest, the mark of a man so long accustomed to signing that he had worn his whole name down to one stroke. H. Linnet read it through twice. Then she raised her eyes to the servant, who returned her look with the smooth blankness of a well-trained man, and she asked the one question that counted. Whose carriage is this? His Grace's. Miss. His Grace of what? Haldane, miss? And Linnet Caro, who had believed herself long past the reach of any fear, felt something colder than the winter settle low inside her. She knew the name. There was not a house in England that did not know it. It was the name of the family whose daughter had died of her father's work. It was the one door in all the kingdom, with more cause than any other to wish every Caro in the ground. And it had sent a warm carriage out into the dark to look for her, and offered her an oven, and signed the offer with a single letter and not one word of why. The name of Haldane had a shape in the mouths of London, and the shape was not a kind one. Everyone had heard of the Duke of Haldane, and almost no one had sat at a table with him, for the much whispered reason that he would not sit at a table with anyone at all. No one in the town could claim to have watched the man take so much as a morsel in company. He kept no table in a world built upon them, and when the land or the law forced him into a great house, he was gone before the first dish was carried in. But he broke bread with no one. Many reasons were offered for it, and no two agreed. Some said the grief of his sister's death had turned his mind, that a man who had watched a girl die of a poisoned sweet could never again lift a fork without seeing it. Some said a curse lay on the house, and crossed themselves. Some said, lower, that it was guilt, that a man does not shun every table in England unless he fears what may be laid upon one, or cannot bear to sit among the living. And some said only that he was too proud to share a meal with lesser mouths, and those hated him deepest of all, for a world built upon the shared table cannot forgive the man who rises from it untouched. On one point, though, every rumor agreed. The Duke of Haldane did not break bread. He had made of that one refusal a wall so complete about himself that it had long since stopped being a habit and become the whole of what the world knew of him. The Duke who breaks bread with no one. It was not a name to steady the nerves of a woman whose father had been condemned in every parlor for a poisoned dish. Linnet stood in the freezing court and turned the thing over in her mind. She thought of the northern towns and the long road to them, and the little left in her purse to carry her so far, of the cold coming down again with the dark, of the last of her courage which was very nearly spent. Why? She said aloud to the servant, to the letter, to no one. Why should that house, of all the houses in England, offer me anything but the back of its hand? The servant had no answer, and it was not his place to have one. The horses shifted in their traces, and the light drained out of the court, and Linnet Caro made the only choice that is left when there is truly no choice at all. She got into the carriage. It was warm within, warmer than anywhere she had been in a fortnight, and a thick traveling rug lay folded on the seat. She pulled it across her knees and was ashamed of how much comfort so small a thing could give. Then the door was shut upon her, and the carriage swung out of the court and away, bearing her past the last lamps of the city and into the country dark, toward a house she had never seen, a man who would sit at no table, and a purpose she could not for her life imagine. Lark Hollow, when she came to it late the next day, was not the house her fear had built for her on the road. She had pictured something grim. A man who shut himself away from every table, she had reasoned, would keep a joyless house to match, all barred shutters and cold hearths and long dark passages where the dust lay thick. Lark Hollow was nothing of the kind. It was a long, low, rambling old house of pale stone and steep roofs, grown up out of its hill across the centuries, with no single plan to it, and it stood in the winter dusk, with its windows lit warm and smoke rising straight from a great many chimneys into the still evening air. It had the look, she thought, climbing stiff and frightened down into the courtyard, of a place that was lived in and loved and full, and that was the last thing on earth she had looked for, and it unsettled her more than any grimness could have done. Grimness she had come prepared to meet. This she had not. She was met by the housekeeper, a broad, kind, worried-looking woman named Mistress Oakes, who came out into the cold herself, took Linnet's frozen bundle as though it were something precious, clucked over the state of her hands, and hurried her within out of the wind. But Mistress Oakes did not lead her first to a bedchamber. She led her out again across a cobbled yard to a squat stone building set apart, with its own low door and crooked chimney. His Grace bade me show you this before aught else, the housekeeper said, for he said it was the thing you had come for, and you would not rest easy till you had seen it. And she lifted the latch and stood back. It was the bakehouse. And Linnet understood at once, standing in the doorway, why the letter had named it a tenancy and not a gift, for the place was very nearly a ruin. It was the estate's own bakehouse, and plainly it had been the worst of its kind for a lifetime, a cold, forgotten, tumble-down room where the estate's coarse daily loaves had once been grudgingly turned out by hands that did not care, until at last no one had troubled with it at all. The plaster was black, the shelves hung broken, and a generation of neglect lay gray over everything. And yet, someone had been there before her. The great brick oven, old as the house and long gone dead, had been swept clean of its years of ash and lit, and it was drawing clean and well, a low good heat rolling off it into the cold room, so that whoever had woken it had known exactly how to coax an old oven back to life and had stayed to see the thing took. And along the one sound wall a table had been scoured white, and set out upon it in careful order was all that a confectioner's 2 hands could ask for: good flour in a covered bin, sugar of the finest sort, and a great deal of it, butter and cream from the home farm, almonds, honey, spices in little stoppered jars, not the leavings of a poor kitchen, but the makings of a fine one, laid out with a care no servant gives, a task he has merely been ordered to do. "Who did this?" Linnet asked. Her voice did not come out as she had meant it to. Mistress Oakes twitched straight a cloth that had no need of straightening. "His Grace's order, miss," she said, and something crossed the broad, kind face, some private wondering of her own. "He came down here himself these 2 mornings past, and saw the oven lit with his own eyes, and would not go up again until it drew clean. He does not as a rule come near the bakehouse. I could not tell you why he took the trouble, for he tells no one why he takes any trouble he takes. But he took it." She went to the door. "Come up when you are ready, miss. You will find we make no fuss here, and you are not to make any either." And she went out, and left Linnet standing in the ruined bakehouse in the warmth of an oven a Duke had lit for her before she asked, and for a long moment she could make no sense of it at all. It had been 2 years since anyone had readied a thing for her out of plain kindness, asking nothing back. She had half forgotten that such houses were still in the world. She held her cold hands out to the good heat, and told herself it meant nothing, that a great estate had 100 fires and an idle hour to light one, but a man who would not eat at any table in England had come down twice in the cold to see that this one oven drew, and she did not know what in the world she was to do with that. She met Lady Honoria that evening, and Lady Honoria, at the least, made a kind of sense. The Duke's godmother was a small, straight-backed woman of near 80, with a sharp-lined face and quick, dark eyes that missed nothing in a room. She had lived at Larkhollow longer than her godson had been master of it, and where he kept his silences and shunned his tables, she filled the gap with talk enough for 3. To talked from the moment Linnet was shown in, a dry, easy stream of it about the road and the cold and the sorry state of the bakehouse, and it was a while before Linnet understood the talk was the old woman had seen her fright, and was covering it, asking nothing of her, but that she sit by the fire, and let the words wash over her until the shaking stopped. "You will want to know why you are here," Lady Honoria said at last, when the worst of the trembling had gone out of her guest. "Any woman with a grain of sense would want to know, coming to this house of all houses bearing your name. I will tell you the part that is mine to tell, which is little enough. My godson is weary of the bakehouse standing empty and useless, and has taken a notion that a baker of real skill might make something of it. He asked me nothing, and told me less. He does as he does. Whether you will suit the place, I cannot say, and whether the place will suit you, I can say still less. But it is winter, and you are here, and neither of us has a better use for the season. We may as well see." "You know my name," Linnet said. She had learned to say it before others could, to have the naming done with. "You know whose daughter I am, and what was said of her father." The old woman looked at her a long, level moment with her quick, dark eyes. "I know exactly whose daughter you are," she said. "I knew it before ever the carriage was sent out for you, and I will tell you this much for your comfort and no more, for the rest is not mine to give away. There is not one soul beneath this roof who believes a word of what was said of your father. Now, eat your supper, child. You are all edges and bone, and I cannot abide to watch good food go untouched in a house whose master will not touch any." And she turned the talk firmly to other matters, and Linnet understood that she had come hard up against the edge of what Lady Honoria would tell, and that all the rest of it lay somewhere in the quiet of a man she had not yet so much as seen. She spent her first days at Larkhollow waiting for the price. Everything the 2 years past had taught her told her there would be one, that the kindest seeming gifts were only the ones whose reckoning came dearest at the last. So she watched for it, watched the house and the shut door of the study, waiting for the kindness to turn its face and show the demand beneath. The true cost of the warm room and the oven lit before she asked. A price was a thing she knew how to reckon with. This unpriced kindness she had no reckoning for at all, and the price did not come. The days went by, then a week, and the demand she braced for each morning was never made. Nothing was asked of her at all. Left to herself in the bakehouse, slowly, against every instinct she owned, she began to do the only thing she knew. She began to work. She set the ruined place to rights with her own hands, unable to sit idle and wait to be turned out into the cold again. She scoured the plaster and mended what shelves would take mending, and swept a lifetime of grime out through the low door. She learned the temper of the old oven, which ran fierce at the back, and kept a cold corner by the mouth, and worked with its faults as one learns to live beside the faults of a person. And on the third day, because the flour and sugar and sweet butter stood there going to no use, and her hands had gone too long without their proper labor, she made something, only a small thing. A tray of little almond cakes. The plain, perfect kind her father had set her to before she was tall enough to see over the table. She slid them into the oven, and the old bakehouse filled with a smell it could not have known in 100 years of coarse gray loaves, and Linnet stood in the warm dark of it and felt a thing come loose in her chest that had been bound tight for 2 years. She did not eat one. She left the tray to cool and went up to her supper, telling herself she had baked them only to prove the oven, knowing, as she said it, that this was untrue. In the morning the tray was bare, every cake gone, and in their place, set square, in the middle of the table where she could not fail to find it, was a thing she had not left there. A small twisted paper of saffron, the true kind, the dear kind, that her father had kept locked away and spent only on the finest work of his life. No word came with it, and no name. There was only the empty tray, the saffron, and the plain fact that someone had come into the bakehouse in the gray before dawn, eaten what she had made, and left the means to make something finer still. She stood over it a long while, and was more shaken by not understanding it than any named price could have shaken her. A man who would break bread with no one had eaten her cakes alone in the dark where no eye could see him do it. She did not yet know what it meant, but standing over the bare tray in the cold, clean morning, she found she wanted more than she had let herself want anything in 2 years. To find out. We will pause here just a moment. If you would like to follow Linnet's story through to its end, do take the time to subscribe before we carry on. It was through the bread that she began to know the truth of him, long before anyone put a word of it to her. The bakehouse came awake under her hands out of its long death. Within a fortnight it was a working room again, warm and swept and full of good smells from the black hour before dawn until the light failed. And as she worked, she learned the shape of the days at Larkhollow, and by the shape of the days she came, without meaning to learn the shape of the man whose days they were. He was not idle. That was the first surprise, for she had pictured a man who fled all company as one who did nothing but brood behind a shut door. The Duke of Haldane worked, steadily, without cease, at the running of a great estate and a good deal besides. Much of it he did on paper from a study whose door mostly stood open, and whose quiet was never an empty one. In the same spare, upright hand, she knew from 3 lines in a single letter. Letters went out from Larkhollow by the dozen, and with a great many of them went money, and slowly, moving about the house and the land on the old lady's small errands, Linnet began to see where the money went. She saw the first of it by chance, on a raw morning in her 3rd week, When she walked down to the mill at the foot of the estate to ask after a finer grade of flour, the mill was new. The timbers of it were pale and unweathered, and the stones still sharp at its edges. And the miller, a slow, broad man named Truitt, spoke of it while he filled her sack, not knowing who she was or where she lodged, in the way country folk speak of a wonder. His old mill had burned, he told her, in a dry summer some years back, and with it his living and his trade and the flour of half the neighborhood. He had sat up a week, waiting for the agent to come and turn him off the tenancy, for a burned mill pays no rent, and he knew the law of it. The agent had come, but the agent had brought a paper that forgave the rent and money to raise the mill again better than it had stood before, and never a word of who had willed it. Some fund, they had told him. He shook his head over the flour. There was no fund, he said, that walked the burned ground at first light to see how the new sills were laid. He had watched the man do it, the tall, dark one who would never stop to eat with anybody, out in the gray before the household stirred, looking a long while at the ruin, and gone again before Truitt could get his boots on to thank him. A fund. He laughed and wiped his eyes and was not ashamed of it. There was a man about these parts, he said, did more good in a 12-month than 10 who preached it, and had taken some hurt somewhere that kept him from letting it be known. He put the man in his prayers by no name at all, having none to give him, and reckoned the Almighty knew the one he meant. Lynette carried that home in her, and it did not leave her. She had come to Larkhollow believing herself the only soul in the county who owed the strange duke a debt she could not name. She saw now that she was one of a great many. They were scattered through the fields and the cottages and the lanes, a whole quiet company of people set back on their feet by a hand. Not one of them could take and shake. They put a nameless man in their prayers and never knew he had a name at all. She came upon it again, after that once she had the eyes for it. She was crossing the yard one gray noon when a churn was found spoiled in the dairy, a whole day's cream gone to waste, and a young dairymaid stood white and shaking beside it, for the fault was hers. And a maid turned off without a character is a maid who does not eat. The steward was working himself toward a dismissal, and the duke came out of the cold and into the dairy, and everyone fell quiet, waiting for the master's judgment, which they all supposed would be a hard one. He did not raise his voice. He looked a long moment at the spoiled churn, and a longer one at the frightened girl, and then he said only that a maid learns her craft from the one set over her, and that if this one were ever turned off for a fault, it was the steward who had failed to teach it out of her, and the steward who would answer for it. And he went out. No one was scolded, no one was shamed. A careless girl was simply wordlessly kept and made safe, and the whole of it was done in a dozen words and gone. She learned of others she did not see. A clever village boy, poor as a mouse, sent away to a good school with his fees paid by a hand he would never know. A widow kept off the parish by a pension, a lawyer swore came from a charity, so that she need never feel the weight of one man's private kindness on her back. And every week she found a great batch of the plain good bread that came now from her own oven went out from the Larkhollow gate to the poor of the parish, given as though the parish itself had baked it, so that no hungry soul need ever say thank you to a living face. She asked Lady Honoria about it once, on a still afternoon by the fire. The old woman was quiet a while before she answered. "He cannot abide to be thanked," she said at last. "Mark me, I do not mean he is modest, for he is not, and I will not have you thinking it a pretty humility, because it is a harder thing than that. He does not believe there is any worth in what a man merely says. Not his thanks, nor his word, nor any promise made across a table. He learned somewhere that the things a man says in company are worth nothing at all. So he gives only the things that are real, the things a man can do without opening his mouth or sitting down to meat with anyone. A roof is real. A mill is real. A loaf is real. My godson has come to trust only what can be done in silence and paid for without a word, and never once acknowledged. She looked at Linnet with her bright old eyes. "He was not always so. That is the part you do not have, and I will not give it you, for it is his and not mine. But he was not always a man who ate alone. Once he was the most open-hearted boy you ever saw. He talked, and he trusted, and he believed that if a thing were only true, you had merely to say it and the world would hear. Something cured him of that belief. I was by when it happened. I have watched him pay for it every day of 10 years, and I would give what is left of my life to undo it. And I cannot, for the only soul who can undo it is himself, and he has stopped believing there is any use in trying." Linnet carried that with her a long time after. She began, from that day, to watch the Duke of Haldane differently. Not for the price any longer. For the wound, the tasting did not stop. It became, that winter, the strangest and truest conversation of her life. She fell into a way of leaving something out each night on the white scrubbed table when she went up. Not the plain wares now, but the small experiments her hands had missed for 2 years. A tart of forced rhubarb, a bun spiced against the cold, a sugared bread wound through with the saffron he had left her. And each gray dawn she came down, and the plate was bare, and each dawn there was something set beside it in answer. Never a great deal. A pinch of salt laid on the board beside a batch that had wanted it. Once, beside a loaf she had thought her best, a small green sprig of rosemary and nothing else, which sent her puzzling half the morning before she understood he meant her to try it in the crumb, and tried it, and found he had been right. He wrote to her only rarely, and only about the work, in the spare upright hand. She would say aloud to the empty room as she baked that a certain almond cake was as good as any her father had made, and in the morning find a line that said it was better in the making and worse in the shaping, and that she rolled her paste too thin from wanting to please. She would answer that aloud too, tartly, and in the morning find another line. He was seldom kind and never false. A man who must set a thing down in ink, she came to think, does not set it down lightly, and everything the Duke of Haldane wrote to her on those small cards was weighed and honest and meant. She kept them. She could not have said why at first. She kept them in the drawer of her dressing table, a slow-growing stack, and told herself it was only that they were the nearest thing to talk she had. She met him properly at last on a black morning, when she came down earlier than her wont, and found him already there, standing over her cooling tray in the light of the one lamp. She stopped in the doorway. He did not start. He looked at her with the clear gray eyes, and something in him grew still and watchful. A man caught at a thing he had meant to do unseen. "They are for anyone who wants them, Your Grace," she said, when the silence had gone on too long. "First, you need not come in the dark." "I know it," he said. His voice was low and little used, rougher than a duke's voice had any right to be, as though speaking cost him something small each time. "I prefer the dark." She had set the kettle to warm, and now hardly thinking, she poured and held a cup out to him across the board. The plainest courtesy in the world. And she watched him look at it, and want it, and not take it. He did not sit. He would not put a thing to his mouth while another soul stood by to see him do it. He inclined his head instead, gravely, as though refusing a gift, and said only that her rye had improved, and she should trust the sourness more, and went out into the last of the dark. And Linnet stood with the cup going cold in her hand, and understood that she had just watched a man refuse a cup of warm tea as though it were a cliff edge, and that whatever ailed him was not pride, and was not madness, and was a grief so wide she could not see the sides of it. There came a caller to Lark Hollow that same week, a Lady Danby, a county wife who called on Lady Honoria twice a year and knew everyone's business but her own. She looked Linnet over with a frank, hungry curiosity and worked her way, over the tea, to the thing she had come to say. "Of course," she said comfortably. "They do say he is not quite right, poor man," and she touched her own temple and smiled. "One hears such things. It is not natural, a man who will not sit to meat with a living soul. My husband says, a man who will not break bread with you is a man with a thing on his conscience he dare not swallow. Lynette set down her cup. She had not meant to speak. She heard herself speak. Your husband is mistaken, she said. I have lived on this land the whole of this winter. In that time I have watched a burned miller set back. In a better mill, a frightened girl kept from ruin, a widow kept off the parish, and the poor of this whole parish fed at a stranger's gate every week of the winter, and all of it done by a hand that took the greatest care in the world never to be seen or thanked for any of it. That is not a man with a thing on his conscience. That is a man who has decided that saying is cheap and doing is dear, and has chosen the dear thing every time. I could wish there were more of them in the world, and fewer who tap their heads over the tea. There was a silence. Lady Danby's smile set hard. Across the room, Lady Honoria made a small sound into her needlework that might have been a cough, and was not. And Lynette, her heart going hard, understood two things at once: that she had been unforgivably rude to a guest, and that she had meant every word of it and would say it again. She had spoken for the silent Duke exactly as 10 years before, and unknown to her. The silent Duke had once spoken for her father into a room that did not wish to hear it. She did not know that then. She did not know he heard of it. He heard of everything at Lark Hollow. That evening there was a card on the bakehouse table in the spare upright hand. It said only that Lady Danby was not worth the flour, but that he thanked her for it. And beneath it, for the first time, the single letter. She kept that card apart from the others, in a place of its own. He watched her more that winter than she knew, and thought a great deal more than he wrote. He had planned the whole of it in silence, the way he planned everything. Find the daughter. Take her in. Do for her in deeds what he had failed to do for her father in words. See her safe and fed, and when the proof was ripe, give her back the name that had been stolen from her, and be quit at last of a debt 10 years old. It had been a clean plan, a debt with a shape to it, a thing a man could pay and be done with. He had not planned for the second morning in the bakehouse, when a ruined girl told him he was wrong about her own rye, and was right and did not soften it because he was a duke. He had not planned for the way the cold house felt different with her in it, nor for the mornings he came down in the dark for the company of a tray of cakes and the risk of her footstep on the stair. There were moments now when he wanted to sit down. That was the danger of her. 10 years he had wanted nothing of any table. Now the want rose in him like water behind a wall, and he set it down in ink. Or not at all, and knew, in the part of a man that does not lie to itself at the gray hour, that the wall would come down whether he willed it or no, and he did not yet know what would bring it. It was Lady Honoria, in the end, who told her why she was truly at Lark Hollow, or told her the beginning of it, the thread that led down into all the rest. It was a hard, bright morning near the end of February, and the old woman was in one of her fierce moods. She looked at Lynette across her needlework and said, without any preamble at all, that the girl still did not know why she had been sent for, that it was eating her from the inside, that she could see it eating her, and that she was going to break her word to her godson and tell her a part of it. Being 80 years old and having earned the right to break a word or two before she went. I would rather you did a foolish thing out of knowing, she said, than a foolish thing out of not knowing. The first has at least some chance of being the right foolishness. She set the needlework down in her lap. Do you know how your father was ruined, child? The whole of it, or only the part they printed? I know he did not do it, said Lynette. Yes, he did not do it. I know that too. The old mouth was grim. There was a man near 10 years ago now who did do it. A clever, patient, greedy man who wanted what your father had, the custom of the great houses, the trust of them, the standing that a common man may buy no other way than by feeding the mighty at their own tables. He could not win it honestly, for your father was the better craftsman and always would be. So he did not win it honestly. He found a way to reach the sweet course after it left your father's kitchen and before it reached the table, and he tampered with it, meaning only to spoil the Caro name with a plate of sickness, a ruined reputation, a lost contract that would fall to him. He did not mean a girl to die of it, but a girl died of it, and the man let your father carry the whole weight of the dead and never once put out his hand to lift the smallest part of it off him. Linnet had gone very still. That man is dead now, Lady Honoria went on. He died in his bed a few years since, respected and mourned, a great man of trade and charity, knighted for his good works. Sir Edmund Marle. You will have eaten his charity bread in a workhouse queue for all I know. The thing he did died respectable along with him and would have stayed buried in the ground forever, but for one person living who knew the truth of it and could not prove it. She looked at Linnet steadily. He was 22. His sister was the girl who died, a young woman of 19. The last of his blood he loved in the world, and he sat by her while she died, and he swore he would have the truth of how it happened. And he got it. He was young and clever and open-hearted and certain, in the way of 22, that the truth had only to be spoken to, be believed. So he stood up, in a great room, at the very height of the scandal, in front of every soul who mattered and who could have saved your father if they had chosen to. He stood up and told it. He named Sir Edmund Marle. He said your father was innocent, and he said, who was guilty? And he said it with his whole young heart before all of them. She stopped. The fire cracked in the grate. And they laughed at him, she said, and her old voice was steady and terrible. That is the thing you must hold on to if you are ever to understand him at all. They laughed. A boy of 22, half wild with grief, no proof to his name but his own certainty, standing up to accuse a great and generous and newly honored man, and to defend a common poisoner of the tradesman's sort. They thought it a rare joke. Marle's friends closed about him like water closing over a stone. They painted my godson a green fool taken in by a clever rogue, or a boy driven out of his wits by sorrow, and they took his very speaking and made a weapon of it against your father. See, they said, the confectioner has no defender in the world but a mad, grieving boy who will say anything. His speaking did not save your father, it helped to sink him. That is what Alaric has carried for 10 years, she said more quietly. Not the failing only, the making it worse. He stood up and spoke the truth with the whole of his heart, and the truth was laughed down, and his speaking of it did harm to the very man he meant to save. A thing like that will cure a man. It cured him. From that day, he has not believed that a word of his, said aloud in company, at a table, in a bright room, is worth the breath it costs. So he stopped saying them. He gave up the rooms and the tables where the lie had been told and his truth had been mocked, and a good man destroyed by the smiling of it. He would still eat alone, unseen, for a man must live. But he would break bread in company no more, and sit at no shared table, for that same table had taken his sister, and laughed his truth to death in one season. He would do instead the things a man can do in silence, alone, in the dark, that no one can laugh at because no one need ever know. And he waited. Waited for what? Said Linnet, though she thought now that she knew for proof. For the weight he lacked at 22. He has spent 10 years gathering patiently, in the only way he trusts, what he could not gather in time to save the father, and he waited to see what would become of the daughter. He could not undo what was done. He could not give your father his name back while he lived, and now your father is dead. But the daughter was somewhere in the world, living, paying every day for a crime that was not even her own. And my godson has never for 1 hour forgotten that he owes that daughter a debt he was not able to pay in words. The old woman took up her needlework again, and her hands were not quite steady. So when word reached him this winter that you were in London, turned from every door, your name a poison in every mouth, He did the one thing he has left himself to do. He opened his own door. There, child. Now you know why the oven was lit before ever you asked. It was not for a baker, it was for a debt. I have broken my word to him, and I do not repent it. And you will not tell him I told you, and you will do now whatever the knowing tells you to do. Linnet sat a long time in the bright cold room, and did not move, and understood a great many things at once. She understood the debt she had seen in the gray eyes that first black morning. She understood the oven and the saffron and the whole quiet architecture of a man who gave only what could not be traced. She understood the shape of the silence itself, and the tables he would not sit at, for they were the tables where his sister had been poisoned and his truth had been laughed to death in one same season. And she understood, with a pang that took the breath clean out of her, what it meant for her. Everything he had done for her, every kindness of that whole strange winter, had been done not for her at all. It had been done for a debt to a dead man out of a grief and a guilt 10 years old. The man who had done it had never once expected, or wanted, or so much as imagined that she might come to matter to him for her own sake. And she understood, sitting there over the cold hearth of her own heart, that she had come to want him too. That was the foolishness the old woman had seen coming. She had fallen. Somewhere in that winter of lit ovens and empty trays and honest cards, wholly and hopelessly in love with the Duke who would break bread with no one. He did not know it. He would never dream of it. He believed himself only to be paying, in deeds, an old debt to a name. It was a hard thing to know and a bitter thing to a proud woman, to love a man who was only being kind to her out of guilt for her father. For a day or two she thought that the one bearable thing, the only clean thing, was to go, to take her pride and the knowing, and put herself beyond the reach of a kindness that was in truth an apology to the dead. And yet, in the end she did not go, and the reason she did not go was the thing that changed everything after. For it was not weakness, and it was not even love, though love was in it. It was that she had begun, in the dark bakehouse at the gray hour, to see the man behind the debt, and the man behind the debt was worth more than the debt, and worth more than her pride. She found she could not walk away from a man who had shut himself out of every warm room in England over a wound that no living soul had ever tried to heal, when she was perhaps the one person left who might. She had come to Lark Hollow to be saved. She stayed in the end, because she had begun to believe she might be the one doing the saving, and that was worth more, to a woman who had lost everything, than any wage or any warm room in the world. By the turn of the year toward spring, the worst bakehouse in the county had stopped being the worst of anything. It began with the Carters. The London road ran within a mile of the Lark Hollow gate, and a carter who had once stopped at the estate only to water his horses began to stop for the bread as well, and to speak of it at the next inn, and then the next. Word of that kind travels faster than any other. Within a month, there were travelers who broke their journey at Lark Hollow on purpose, for the almond cakes and the saffron loaves, and the little spiced buns of a baker whose hands had been trained to feed the first houses in England, and who now, for reasons no one could explain, fed anyone with a coin at a tumble-down door in Surrey. The custom grew, the takings grew. Linnet, who had come with everything she owned in one bundle, found she had a trade again, a small, good-rising trade, and something in her that had lain flat for years began slowly to stand up. She should have known that a thing rising can be seen from a long way off. She should have known who would be watching. Sir Edmund Marle had left a widow, and the widow was very much alive, and her name was Lady Beatrix Marle. She was, in her way, as much the ruler of a certain part of that country as the Duke was master of his. She was a handsome woman still, near 50, with a smooth, unlined face and a pleasant, cold smile, and a manner so gracious that people did not always understand. They had been cut until they were already bleeding. She had built the whole of her life since her husband's death upon 3 things: the respectability of his name, the great fortune his charities had left behind, and the warm reputation he had died wrapped in, and she guarded all three, the way a lioness guards her young, and for the same reason. They were the whole of what she had. Whether she knew the precise thing her husband had done 10 years gone to a confectioner named Caro, or whether she had made herself unknow it, in the way people do with the crimes that keep them comfortable, no one could have said. Either way, she knew this much, with the sharp instinct of a woman whose whole standing rests upon a buried thing. She knew the Caro name was a danger, and the Caro name rising again. Under the roof and the protection of the Duke of Haldane, the one man living who had ever stood up and spoken it in the same breath as her husband's, was a danger of an entirely different order. She moved to end it as such people move pleasantly, leaving no mark, in a way that could never be traced back to her own hand, and she reached first for the two oldest weapons there are. The first was the girl's good name, and that it was so easy was the cruelty of it. A young unmarried woman living on the land of an unmarried duke was a thing that needed only to be said in the right voice for the saying to do all the work. It did not matter that Lady Honoria kept the house, that every propriety was observed, that Linnet was a tenant with an oven and nothing more. Lady Beatrix mentioned it. She mentioned it graciously with a little sigh and a great show of reluctance in a dozen drawing rooms, that it was such a pity, such a very great pity, that the Caro girl, whatever one thought of her poor father, should have thrown away the last rag of her good name to go and live so very irregularly with a man like Haldane, of whom one heard such strange things, and she let the little sigh do the rest. The second weapon was older still, and lay so ready to her hand it might have been forged for this. She had only to remind the county what the name of Caro had once meant, a whisper here, a lifted brow there. Did they truly mean to buy their bread, to feed it to their children, from the hand of the family that had poisoned a duke's own sister at her own table? However pretty the cakes, however cheap the loaf, was any saving worth the risk of it? What? And the whisper spread as the first disgrace had spread, and did precisely what it was built to do. The genteel custom cooled first, and then the fearful orders were left unanswered. A sugar factor who had been glad of her account grew suddenly regretful, and could supply her no longer. The market town, when she carried her wares to it, found it had no stall to spare her, and Linnet learned of it the way one always learns of such things, slowly, and then, all at once, a coldness where there had been warmth, a letter that went unanswered, and then, on a single cruel afternoon, the whole shape of it laid bare. She had driven out with Lady Honoria to a house where the old woman had been received for 50 years, and the door was opened, and the daughter of the house came out to the carriage herself, pink and wretched, to say that her mother was not at home. Lady Honoria, near 80, who had never in her life been refused a door, sat very straight in the carriage and said not a word until they were away. Then she said, in a voice shaking with a rage Linnet had never heard in her, that they would shut their doors on her at her age, over a lie, sooner than shut them on Beatrix Marle, and that they would see about that. But beneath the rage, Linnet heard the hurt, and knew with a sick certainty that she was the cause of it, that her presence was ruining the one old woman who had been wholly kind to her, and would ruin in the end the man who had taken her in, and that the honorable thing, the only decent thing left to her, was the thing she had refused to do a month before. To go. She went to him that evening. She had never once in the whole winter gone to him to speak of a thing that mattered. She went now. He was in his study, the door open, the candles lit, the spare upright hand moving over a paper. He looked up when she came in, and something crossed the still face at the sight of her, some quickening quickly mastered. She made herself say it plainly, all of it, because he was a man who trusted only what was real, and a plain truth plainly said was the realest thing she had to give him. "You must let me go," she said. "You know what is being said. You know who says it. Lady Honoria was refused a door today, at her age, after 50 years, because of me, because I am here. That woman means to ruin the three of us, and she will do it, because a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. Her voice caught, and she steadied it. I know why you brought me here. Your godmother told me. I know about my father, and what you did, and what it cost you. I know this was never a tenancy, it was a debt. And you have paid it, your grace, 10 times over. I release you from the rest of it. You owe my father nothing more, and you owe me nothing at all. Let me go, and let the talk go out of the gate with me, and keep your godmother her doors, and yourself your peace. It is the only thing left that I can do for any of you, and I am asking you to let me do it. There was a long silence, and it was not like the other silences. She watched him take up his pen, out of 10 years of habit, to write his answer, and watched him look at it a moment and set it down. Some great struggle was going on behind the still gray eyes, the struggle of a man who had answered the whole world in ink and in deeds for 10 years, and was faced at last with a thing that neither ink nor deed would answer. He stood. He came round the desk, and he stood before her close, so that she had to lift her face to his. And then the Duke of Haldane, who had not sat at a table with a living soul in 10 years, did a thing she did not expect at all. He crossed to the small table by the fire, where a covered plate had been set for him, as one was set every night, and every night carried away untouched, and he took the cloth from it. It was her bread, a piece of the saffron loaf she had baked that morning, and he sat down, and with his eyes upon hers, in the lit room, with another soul watching him do it, he broke the bread, and he ate. It was the smallest thing in the world, and it was enormous. She saw what it cost him, saw that his hand was not quite steady, and understood that she was watching a man take down, with his own 2 hands and in front of her, the wall he had lived behind for 10 years. No, he said, when he had done. His voice was low and rough, with more than disuse. You will not go. He set the bread down. I let you believe this was a debt because it was the easier thing, and because a debt is a thing I know how to pay in silence, and I have paid everything in silence for 10 years. It was a debt once. It has not been a debt for a long while. It stopped being one on the second morning in that bakehouse, when you told me I was wrong about your own rye, and were right and did not soften it because I was a duke. I did not tell you. I have not spoken a true thing that mattered aloud in 10 years, having stopped believing my telling could make a thing safe, or heard, or worth the saying. So I let you think it a debt. I was a coward. I have finished with being one. He drew a breath. Beatrix Marl will not ruin you. I will not permit it. And I will not permit it in the one way I have refused for 10 years even to try. Because you have taught me this winter that there is a worse thing than a truth spoken and laughed to death. It is a truth held back out of fear, and the harm let go on, and the fear given the name of wisdom. I called it wisdom for 10 years. It was fear. You have cured me of it. Something moved at the hard corner of his mouth, the very ghost of a thing, the near sight of a smile she had never seen. Go to bed, Linnet, he said. Trust me, and do not speak to me again of going. You will find, he added more quietly, and she heard the cost of the lightness, that it is not so easy a thing, when it is your own turn to sit down at the table. Go up. I have letters to write, and for the first time in 10 years, I know exactly what I mean to say. The great assembly of the county was held that spring, as it was held every spring, in the long rooms of the assembly house in the county town. Everyone came who was anyone for 30 miles about, and that year they came burning with the story of the Carrow girl and the silent duke. Lady Beatrix Marl came to it certain, at the very height of her power, that she had won. She had every reason. The daughter was twice disgraced, the old godmother shut out of doors, and the Duke of Haldane could no more defend them in that bright room than sprout wings. He would stand where he always stood, at the cold edge, and take nothing, and say nothing, and let the tide carry the girl out. Lady Beatrix had built her whole plan upon the one surest thing in England, the refusal of the Duke of Haldane ever to sit down among his fellow men. She swept in her finest, was received like a queen, and let fall the smallest gracious sighing mention of poor Lady Honoria, who should know better at her age, and of the Caro girl, of whom the less said the kinder. Linnet had not wished to come. The Duke had asked her to, not written, asked aloud in the rough, relearned voice, and she found she could refuse him nothing when he spent his hard-won words upon the asking. So she came on Lady Honoria's arm into the long, bright rooms full of the very people who had shut their doors on her, and she was cut, thoroughly and at once, by 100 people together, the space opening about her as about a thing diseased. She bore it. She had borne it before. Beside her, Lady Honoria bore it too, fierce and upright and 80 years old, the two of them in their island of cold, clear space, while the assembly glittered around them. And across the room, Lady Beatrix Marle smiled her pleasant smile. And then the Duke of Haldane crossed the room. People did not at first understand what they were seeing. They had half forgotten he was in the room at all, for he stood where he always stood, at the edge, apart. They saw him cross the long floor and made way, as they always made way, supposing he meant to leave or to have some private word with his godmother. He did not go to the edge. He came to where Linnet stood in her ring of cold space and took his place beside her, deliberately, so that the empty space now held a duke, and the keeping of it suddenly cost the whole room something. On a long table down the side of the room, laid with the assembly's supper, stood a plain basket that had come in on his order, and in it was her bread. He turned to face the room, and he did the thing that no soul in that county had seen him do in 10 years. He took a loaf of the Caro bread from the basket in his own 2 hands before all of them, and he broke it, and he ate. And into the silence that fell like a dropped cloth at the sight of it, he began to speak. "You will forgive me," said the Duke of Haldane, and his voice, rough at the first and then steadying, carried down the long room. "I am out of the habit of both these things, the speaking and the eating in company, as you have all been kind enough to notice these 10 years. You have made a great deal of my silence and my empty plate. You have called them pride and madness and worse. I will tell you now what they were, for I find I have at last a reason to break them, and a thing worth saying is best said where the harm was done." He looked once at Linnet and then out again at the room. 10 years ago, in a room much like this one, a young woman of 19 died at a table of a poisoned sweet. She was my sister. And a man was destroyed for her death, who never touched the poison. His name was Caro. He kept the finest confectioner's kitchen in London for 20 years, and never sent out a dish he had not tasted with his own mouth. He did not poison that sweet course. I knew he did not. I knew who did. I was 22, and I stood up in a room like this one and said what I knew, and you laughed at me. Some of you here tonight laughed at me. You called me a green fool and a boy mad with grief, and you took my speaking and made of it one more stone to throw, so that an innocent man went down the faster for my having tried to lift him. I learned that night the lesson you taught me, that a truth is worth nothing in a room like this, unless it comes with weight behind it. So I said no more. For 10 years I gathered the weight. I did in silence what I could not do in speech, and I have it now." He drew from his coat a packet of papers and held it up, and the room was utterly still. The man who reached the sweet course after it left Caro's kitchen and tampered with it to ruin a rival and take his trade, and let an innocent man carry the guilt of a death that he himself had caused, was Sir Edmund Morel. A sound went through the room like wind through standing corn, and he let it pass. I have the proof of it here, the record he believed burned, the letter in his own hand to the man he paid to do the thing. I have had it these 2 years. I did not use it because the man was dead, and I am not in the business of digging up the dead, and his victim's daughter was quiet and beyond his reach, and I judged that tearing it open again would do her more harm than good. His voice hardened. I was wrong. I have been taught this winter that there is a worse thing than a truth that does harm. It is a truth kept back out of fear while the harm goes on, and the fear called prudence. Sir Edmund Marle poisoned my sister by his greed, and let an honest man die of the shame of it, and went to his own grave, respected and mourned. I will not let that stand 1 hour longer, whatever it costs the living, whatever it costs his name, whatever it costs me. Caro was innocent. His daughter is innocent. And the next soul in this room who offers her an unkindness will answer for it to me. I have got my voice back and my appetite with it, and I find I have 10 years of things saved up to say. There is a kind of silence worse than any noise, and it fell now upon the long, bright rooms. And in the middle of it, alone, Lady Beatrix Marle stood, with her pleasant smile gone at last from her face. Slowly, every head in the room turned to look at her. She had built her whole life upon a dead man's name and a buried thing, and the thing was unburied now in a duke's hand before every soul who mattered, and there was no gracious sigh that could cover it, and no cold shoulder that could turn it aside. She looked, in that moment, not like a lioness at all, but like what she was, a frightened woman who had spent years guarding a grave and had just watched it open to the air. She did not speak. There was nothing left to say. She gathered up what remained of her dignity, which was not a great deal, and she went out alone through the parting crowd. The doors of that county closed, behind her one by one in the weeks that followed, exactly as they had once closed on Linnet. And there was no triumph in it that Linnet could find, standing in the long bright room with the Duke beside her, and the whole tide of the assembly turned in a moment from cold to warm. Only the old, sad justice of a buried thing come up at last into the light. They cleared her father's name that spring, in the proper forms, in a quiet room and not a loud one, for the loud part was already done. Took lawyers and time and the whole weight of a duke behind it. At the end, there was a document that said, in the dry, careful language of such things, that Elias Caro, confectioner of London, had been wrongly accused and stood acquitted, and that his good name was restored to him and his heirs forever. Linnet held it in her 2 hands in the bakehouse at the grey early hour, with the Duke beside her, and read the dry words that gave her back the thing stolen from her when she was a girl of 14, and she wept at last the weeping she had trained herself out of for 10 long years. The Duke did not this time keep his distance. He did not leave a card or a token or slip away into the dark. He put his arm about her and let her weep and said nothing, because nothing needed saying, and it was the fullest silence of that whole silent winter. He did not live to see it, she said when she could speak. That is the whole of it. Oh! You have given me back his name, and he is not here to have it. He died believing he had failed, that his honest life had come to nothing, and his daughter was left with a poisoned name and no soul in the world. He never knew anyone believed him but me, and I did not count. He knew, said the Duke. She looked up at him. It is the last thing you do not have, he said, and I will give it you now. The last table I sat at before this winter was your father's. I went to him when he was ruined and dying, an unknown young man he had never met. His house was near bare by then, and what he set before me was very little, and I sat down at his poor table and ate it, so he would know I did not believe him poison, whatever the world had said. And I told him that I knew he was innocent, that I believed him, and that I would not rest until it was proven, however long it took. I could give him nothing but my word, and I had learned by then that my word was worth little. But I gave it to him, and he had it. He was quiet a moment. He knew Linnet. At the end, he knew that one man of the world believed him. It was not enough. It was not his name, nor his life, nor his good years back. But he did not die, thinking no one believed him. I made certain of that much. And then I rose up from your father's table, and I sat at no other with any living soul for 10 years, until the morning I came down in the dark and ate the cakes of a stranger I had lit an oven for. and found I could not stop. She had no words at all. She reached up and touched his hard face, the first time she had ever touched him, and she wept again, and he let her. She was restored that spring to everything she had lost, and more. The doors that had shut on her opened again, eagerly now, ashamed now, and she found she did not care greatly for them, having learned exactly what they were worth. The fine shops that had handed her letter back at arm's length wrote now to beg the honor of her custom, or her receipts, or her name above their door. She kept none of the letters. Lady Honoria had her own doors back, and used them chiefly to be magnificently and unforgivably rude to every soul who had refused her at the height of the trouble which she enjoyed more than she had enjoyed anything in years. He asked her in the bakehouse at the grey hour where the whole of it had begun. He did not leave it on a card. He said it aloud, still a little rough, for the voice was 10 years out of practice and would always carry the mark of those years, and she would not have had it any other way, for the roughness was the proof of what the speaking cost him, and so of what she was worth to him. "I have given you back everything that was taken from you," he said. "Your name, your father's name, your place in the world, such as it is worth. You are free now. You need nothing from me. You have a name to be proud of, doors that will open, a trade of your own, and no debt to any living soul. I made certain of that first, before I let myself ask, for I would not have you take me out of need, or gratitude, or because you had nowhere else to go. You have somewhere else to go now. So I can ask you cleanly, which I could not have done in the winter." He paused, and she saw the cost of it. The man who had spent his words so carefully for 10 years, spending the most careful of them all. "I have sat alone at my own table for 10 years. I did not know it was loneliness until you filled it. Stay. Not as a tenant, not as a debt I am paying, not because you must. Stay because you would. Marry me, Linnet, and sit at my table, and make me break bread like a living man, for I find I can only bear to do it with you, and I have 10 years of appetite saved up." And Linnet Caro, who had come to Larkhollow with everything she owned in one small bundle and no future at all, made the choice that was wholly her own now, freely, out of no need and no fear, choosing only because she chose. "I kept your cards," she said, "every one you ever wrote me, in the drawer of my dressing table, the whole winter, before I understood why. I think I understood before I understood, if you take my meaning." She reached up and touched his face again. "Yes, I will marry you. I will make you break bread, and sit at tables, and be a living man in the world again. Though I warn you, I have grown fond of some of the silences too, and I mean to keep a few of those." She was quiet a moment. "You gave me back my father's name. But you gave me a better thing first, that first night without a word, when you lit an oven in a cold room for a stranger you had never seen and owed nothing. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be only a kindness. I had lost that. It was the worst thing I lost, worse than the name. You gave it back before you knew me, before it could be anything but what it was. That is the man I am marrying. Not only the Duke, who broke his silence in a grand room, though I love him too. They were married at Larkhollow in the early summer, quietly, for neither of them had any taste for grandeur. Lady Honoria sat in the front pew and looked as though she had arranged the entire affair, which she maintained to the end of her long life. She substantially had. And the bakehouse that had been the worst on the estate, the tumble-down room no one would trouble with, became that spring, the thing no one who did not know the story could ever account for. The word of it went up the London road and into the city and would not stop. People came out from London on purpose now, an easy half-day's drive, to break their journey at the little door in Surrey, for the saffron loaves and the almond cakes, yes, but for something else they could not quite have named. It became known that if you stopped at Larkhollow early in the day, you might see a thing worth the whole journey. You might see the Duke of Haldane, The very Duke who for 10 years had broken bread with no living soul, sitting at a plain table in the window of a bakehouse, in full view of the road, breaking bread every morning of his life with his wife. It was the surest cure in the county for a low heart, the people said. The worst bakehouse in Surrey became the first stop out of London, and stayed so, and that was the whole of the marvel, though only the two of them, and one old woman, ever truly knew why. He learned the tables again slowly, and she was patient, for she understood what it had cost to lose the habit, and what it cost to find it. First a table shared only with her, then, on a good evening, one with Lady Honoria too, and in time a table with a guest or two, though he never became a man for great company, and never would. He became instead a man who could break bread with the ones who mattered, and say the true thing aloud to the one it mattered to, when it mattered. It was a great deal more than the world had ever thought him able to give. She kept his cards to the end of her life, the whole winter's worth, the half-written, half-tasted conversation of the season. She came to him with nothing, and found, instead of a wage, a life. And on the wall of the bakehouse, framed among the shelves where anyone might see it and no one could understand it, she hung the first thing he had ever sent her, the 3 lines and the single letter. The wordless kindness of a man who would break bread with no one, done for a stranger, he owed in the cold, on the worst night of her life. No one who did not know the story could ever say why a duchess should frame and honor so plain a scrap of paper, but Linnet knew why. Every respectable door in London had refused her, one after another, in the coldest winter of her life, and had been right to, by the only measure they knew. And one man who would sit at no table in England had said nothing at all, and simply lit an oven and opened his door. It was the whole of her happiness in the end, and it had begun without a single word, over an empty tray, in the gray hour before the dawn.